there is a way to hook your audience and have them completely invested in the story that you're trying to tell. Today I want to take a look at a couple of my recent documentaries, Unbroken and Tragically Beautiful. They are both completely different stylistically and topically, but there are some similarities that draw you in and get the viewers invested and wanting to watch the rest of the film.
This loss has become part of me.
It was just disbelief. Like, how could this possibly be happening after everything we just went through? Just like that, he was gone.
I usually organize my documentaries into 5 parts. Normally, I start with some sort of hook that kind of draws the viewer in, and then I'll go into the introduction where I start introducing the characters and the world that these people are living in. And then I transition into the rising tension where you introduce the conflict and the greatest adversity for your characters and your story. And then the climax where everything comes to a peak and a moment of uncertainty. And then I have the outro or the resolution of my film. And that's where things resolve and the message is kind of taken away from whatever story that we're trying to tell. Today I want to break down each one of these sections and talk a little bit about my thought process and how I organized the story in each one of these films, and hopefully this helps you guys have a little bit of a better understanding of how to organize your documentaries and structure them to actually hook your audience and get them to want to watch your entire film. Before we jump into this video, I wanted to talk to you guys about today's sponsor, and that is Riverside. Riverside is a video and audio recording platform that you could use to record podcasts, or in my case, interviews, for your documentary in 4K resolution. Let me just say that again, we're talking about 4K resolution. If you're anything like me, I love to record my pre-interviews with my subjects, or if I'm making a documentary and my subject is in a really far distant location, you could actually use Riverside to record your interviews for your projects. And the really cool thing about Riverside is that once you're done recording, you could actually download individual files, or you could download the files right to Premiere to save yourself some time. Riverside also offers text-based editing, which is extremely helpful if you need to quickly go through your interview and speed through the editing process. Being able to have the entire interview in a transcript format is extremely helpful for pre-production because you can take exactly what's in that transcript and put it right to your storyboard. So if you guys are interested in using Riverside for your documentaries or even your podcast, definitely check them out, and I'll leave a link in the description down below. So for the first section, I like to classify this as the hook. You honestly have about 30 to 60 seconds to draw intrigue and get your audience into wanting to watch the rest of your film. So the way I think of the hook is we need something impactful, but most importantly, we need something that's going to evoke that curiosity. When I sat down and interviewed the fighter Roy, he spoke about where he came from Venezuela, and what his life was like back in his country.
I spent my whole life fighting. I grew up in a very poor country.
And in my mind, this was a very important aspect of his character and who he is. So for the intro of the film, I used a couple of sound bites from the interview to show the audience what his life was like back in his home country. Now, a big part for hooking my audience for me is sound design. I'm a huge fan of really impactful sound design and fast cuts that kind of come out of nowhere.
We gotta fight our government, we gotta fight to eat, we have to fight for our life.
So if you watch the intro of the film, I started off with some really nice shots of him on the beach. And then when he says this one line, it kind of turns the corner and we cut to all of these different fast-paced images of what his life was like back in Venezuela. And I was really trying to represent the chaos and the despair of what he went through back in his home country. Now, in my opinion, this was creative enough and interesting enough to hook my audience because you have this character kind of walking and training on the beach, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have all these fast-paced images with really impactful sound design kind of hitting you in the face, and all of a sudden you kind of get a quick understanding of who this character is and where they come from. Now let's take a second and look at my other film, Tragically Beautiful, which takes a completely different approach. In the beginning of the film, it kind of starts off slow, but my goal was to drop you right in the middle of what this family was going through, right in the middle of their life.
It's a good idea to have a second person just to keep him occupied or just pin him down. It's just an easier, safer way of doing things and making sure he gets everything that he needs.
And that was to show you something that I believe every human on this planet can resonate with and have compassion for, and that is showing you what this child has to go through just to live. Now, nobody wants to see that, and it's hard to watch, but at the same time, you are invested because you want to know what happened to this child and if they're going to be okay. So by throwing you right in the middle of this family's life, naturally as the audience, you're going to want to know what's about to happen and how are they going to fix this? How are they going to get themselves out of this? And the next section, I like to call the introduction section, and that's because we're going to start introducing the main characters and the storyline of what this documentary is going to be about. Now, I think it's really important that within this next few minutes of the film, the audience has a good understanding of what this film is going to be about, and they're starting to get a feeling of the world that you're creating for them. Now, jumping back into my film Unbroken, we start to understand who this character is and the kind of lifestyle he lives. His entire life is about his career and who he is as a fighter, and you could start to get a glimpse as the audience into the journey that our character or subjects are going to embark on.
To be a fighter, you have to give everything that you have. I had the chance to be on the UFC, to make it.
Now, if we take a look at my other film, Tragically Beautiful, I did something very similar where we start to unfold how we ended up in this place by talking about the mother and the husband, how they met, and how they made baby Noah.
My husband and I met pretty organically. He was just so kind and sweet, and he was charming throughout, and that was it. That was the thing that drew me in, and the topic of children came up fast.
And as you can see from watching this section, our goal is to try to start giving the audience a little bit to the story. Let's figure out who these people are, let's introduce them, let's give a little bit of a hint into their world, into their character, and that's what you really want to start doing in this next section of your film. Now that we've kind of set the stage and we're starting to unfold this story, it's time to introduce the conflict. Now, the conflict is really the driving force behind our subject's reasoning for this journey. It's important to understand and have a really good idea of how you want to introduce this conflict into your film. I want to take a second and look at both of these films and try to pay close attention to the pacing of the edit and how we decided to introduce the conflicts into each one of these films. So our fighter reaches this sort of pinnacle and peak of his career with everything riding on this one fight, on this one moment. And he goes and he tries his best and he fails.
Everything that I work for, to my dreams, to make it, I was so close.
Echeverria continuing to soften up that left leg, and now he goes up. Oh! With the counter shot, sits down Echeverria.
And at this moment, we start to reveal that the conflict is not necessarily an external thing, it's more of an internal thing, which, in my opinion, makes for a way more interesting storyline. Now, let's take a look at Tragically Beautiful and how we decided to reveal the conflict in this film.
It was just disbelief. Like, how could this possibly be happening after everything we just went through? Just like that, he was gone. Like, how could this possibly be real? I just remember for months afterwards, I just kept on begging God to wake me up from this nightmare, to just let it be just that, just a dream.
Now at this moment, she has gone through one of the most tragic things any human being on this planet can go through, and that is losing a loved one. And many of us can all agree that this really is the ultimate conflict. And I think when we're watching films and documentaries as the audience, we're always searching for that silver lining. And when you set up something as tragic as this, and you kind of start to unfold it and how you got to the point where you're at, and this is one of the biggest adversities that you could possibly go through in your life. As an audience, you're invested. You need to see what happens next. In the next section of the film, I like to call this the climax section. And this is where you need to have your audience sitting at the edge of their seat, anxiously wondering if our main character is going to be able to get out of this situation that they're in. But I think most importantly, to be able to properly execute this section of your film, you really have to understand the story that you're trying to tell. Just because we're calling this the climax section doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be super dramatic and over the top. This just means that this is the point where our subject meets their greatest conflict and they go toe-to-toe with that adversity. So I think it's really important to know that the story that you're trying to tell, and remember that sometimes less is more. It could be more beneficial to be subtle with your climax rather than really over the top and dramatic. The climax for Unbroken is our main character really having this internal battle, and the question that he's asking himself is he going to be able to succeed? Is he going to be able to keep moving forward? Is he going to be able to actually conquer himself and fulfill his lifelong dream of becoming a world champion?
I fell short. When I got back from Vegas, it hit me hard. After everything that I've been through, I was just trying to make sense to figure it out on my head.
Now let's take a look at Tragically Beautiful. The question here is, how is she gonna make it through this? Not only is her son going through this nightmare of a situation, but she's also dealing with all the weight and pressure of life all on her own without her husband and any kind of support. Not to mention that she's still dealing with the emotional struggle and issues of losing her husband and losing a loved one that is everything to her.
Every night he was in the hospital, I was in the hospital. It was an overwhelming time, and I didn't know what I was going to do. They said that it was very treatable, and there was a plan made for chemotherapy, and that's when it started getting a little scary about the finances.
Now, one thing that I think is very important is that you give your audience credit to understand the emotion and the conflict that your characters are facing. You don't have to spell it out for them or spoon feed them. Sometimes it's better to let things be unsaid and leave things open to interpretation. Now, the final section of the film is the resolution, and this is where you wrap up the story by resolving the conflict or reinforcing the theme of your film. And sometimes it's both of these. Sometimes you're resolving the conflict and you're also reinforcing that message or that theme of your film. I have found that in my experience, it helps to have some sort of structure while you're either writing the script or editing your film, because it allows you to figure out where to put certain things that characters are saying or certain emotions or themes in your film. And it allows you to have some sort of organization that you can kind of go and hopefully helps you finish your film. So let's take a second and look at The Unbroken and see how this film resolves.
If there's anything that my country taught me, was how to fall and how to get back up again. Because what doesn't break you will make you stronger. I'm Roy the Unbroken Echeverria, and I will be the UFC champion.
As you guys can tell, it ends on a high note, and it ends metaphorically with our character getting back up and beginning to fight again. And his story obviously isn't over, and the goal here was to kind of leave it on a high note and leave the audience wanting to know more and wanting to see what he does next. Now let's take a look at my other film, Tragically Beautiful.
The Giving Circle, they gave me peace of mind and the time that I needed to focus on Noah and to not focus on finances. My rent taken care of, my car payment taken care of, and it was a great relief for me.
You can see that the ending is very different than the other film, and the goal here was to try to resolve this on a positive note and let the audience know that she's received help from the Giving Circle, which is a nonprofit that stepped in and kind of helped her out. And things are starting to turn around for this family. Things are actually starting to look up and become a lot more positive. And I think that it's so important for the audience to feel like they walked away with a message, or maybe the audience feels like they walked away with a little bit more of awareness of a particular subject matter. I think that you have to take the time to really figure out what is the message that I want to leave my audience with. And I think that is just as important as the hook, because if your ending is flat and it just ends with no message or no sort of resolution, then the audience just feels like they wasted their time. And I think it's very important that you take the time and figure out, what am I trying to say and what do I need them to walk away with? For the last couple of years, we've been putting together a course for documentary filmmaking. And if you guys want to learn more about that, I'll leave a link down below, or I'll leave a link right here, and you guys can check that out. Sign up for the email list, and our plan is to hopefully have this course out by the end of the year. And if you guys sign up for that email list, you'll be the first ones to get notified as soon as that course comes out. I'd like to thank you guys for stopping by. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.